Question. What is your creepiest story? Story 1. It was a couple of months off my 21st birthday, spending part of the summer in the US. Met a guy out and about one day and exchanged emails for a few weeks. Meet up one night to share drinks down by a harbor. Legal drinking age here is 18 and I was at university, so my tolerance was pretty high. I watched him open the bottle and pour the glass, so I think all is good. We share a bottle of wine and it's getting dark, so we go to leave. He goes to pee in a bush and a little voice in my head said to pull the drink away, which I did. It was already too late though. My memory is hazy, but I remember feeling totally euphoric and as if I was on top of the world. He was walking me through streets and I still didn't know the town well, even less so in the dark. My most distinct memory is of him taking me to a graveyard and pushing me to the ground before climbing on top of me. The world suddenly spins and I tell him I'm gonna puke. He jumps off me pretty quick. Still not realizing what danger I was in but feeling incredibly nauseous, I ask him to take me back to our meeting spot, which was literally 30 seconds from the house I was staying at. He agrees but then takes me to his back garden and tries to get me into his tree house. I refuse again and ask him to take me back. He eventually does. I ask him to leave me at the spot so I can go home without him seeing where I live, but he insists on walking me home. I'm too out of it to argue, so I let him take me back, figuring I can scream if he tries anything. We get to the house and he pushes up against the car on our drive. I wriggle free and run inside. People I was staying with called the cops, but my insurance was in my parents' name and I didn't want to explain a hospital bill for blood tests and whatever else I'd need to press charges, so I didn't take it further. Gave them a name and description and they said they had someone like that on file. A few days later I tried to look him up, but his name and email brought up nothing, so I think he gave me a false name. Spent the night in and out of consciousness and feeling very, very sick and dizzy. It was not what half a bottle of wine does to me. I'm fairly certain he somehow slipped something in my drink without me seeing, and that I was within an inch of my life of getting raped. If I hadn't felt sick when he pushed me down, I'm fairly certain he would have. I tried to retrace my steps a few days later, but what I remembered didn't add up, so there's huge blank spots in my memory. The next day I had visible bite marks on my collarbone. He broke a bracelet and I had mud on my feet. I'm totally fine, but when I think about it, it really creeps me out how close I was. Oh yeah, and about 3 days later he has the nerve to email me apologizing for what happened and saying he had too much to drink too and asked if I wanted to hang out again. I ignored him and about 2 weeks later get a rather sour-sounding email off him saying that I seemed like such a nice girl and it's a shame, blah blah. What a total cunt. TLDR, spent the summer in the US aged 20, some ass spiked my drink. Saved myself from getting raped by almost vomiting on him. Story 2. When I was in high school I had a huge crush, a guy a couple years older than me. He was on the boys' basketball team and I was on the girls' team. I would always try to get him to play basketball with me at our town's outdoor basketball court. He usually declined. One night in the middle of winter he asked if I wanted to come play one-on-one with him. I thought it was weird he wanted to play basketball in the middle of night in winter, so I had my friend come with. She got bored quickly and he was being really flirty with me, so I agreed she could leave. He assured her he would drive me back to her house. I was spending the night there. About 30 minutes later I'm freezing and ask him to drive me back. We get in his car and he tells me he has to warm the car up before we can go. He's on his phone for about 10 minutes and we are sitting there in silence. Out of nowhere he starts telling me about his sexual fetishes and how he gets off on physically causing other people pain. He said that no one really knows the real him, and if they did it would scare the living shit out of most people. I'm starting to get uncomfortable at this point and ask if we can leave. He pulls out of the parking lot and starts driving the opposite direction of my friend's house. We lived in a small town and he drives about 5 miles out of town and turns on a gravel road. He tells me he's going to take me to meet some people he thinks would really like me. He then tells me I seem like the type of girl who would like being submissive to a bunch of men, and he wouldn't even have to make me beg for it. So I'm getting really freaked out and scared at this point. I'm looking for my cell phone and remembered I had left it at my friend's house to charge. I start asking him questions to distract him. I'm finally able to get my hands on his phone when he stops at the shack. I'm in the middle of nowhere. He isn't aware that I have his phone at this point and tells me to get out of the car because his friends are waiting inside and we don't want to make them mad. I dial 911 and tell him if he doesn't take me back to my friends, I'm calling the police right then. He looks really shocked and then starts laughing hysterically. He tried to convince me this was all a big joke and he wanted to see how I would react. I held his phone with 911 ready to go the entire ride back to my friends. Once he pulled in the driveway and I got out of the car, he rolled down his window and said, "I would really appreciate it if you never tell anybody about this," and peeled out. I was 15 years old and should have called the cops, but I was young and dumb. Story 3. I was working in a convenience store, 19 years old, single mom. Luckily this day I wasn't alone. This guy came in, walked around and then went back to pump his gas. Then drove off without paying. I got the tag number, called the police per policy, and didn't expect anything to come from it because that's what always happened. Gas theft just wasn't a priority to the police department. To my surprise, less than an hour later, an officer walks in and asks me to identify the guy, which I did. I really didn't think too much of it, just happy they caught the asshole. I went on about my business, went home, got on with life. The next day the manager calls me early, tells me that she saw the guy who I had identified on the news. He was wanted for 2 counts of murder. He had murdered a female jogger, no apparent motive, and a convenience store clerk that he had kidnapped after robbing her. I assumed she was mistaken because that just seemed too crazy. Something I did helping catch a murderer just seemed unlikely. Later that day the officer came by and told me it was true and thanked me. Without the tag number they may not have caught him until he had hurt me women. She also told me that the reason that the police caught him quickly was the car was stolen. Then the officer told me the scariest part of all. Coming in and walking around the store is exactly the same thing he did before the robbery, kidnapping of the second woman he murdered. I will never know exactly why he didn't rob me, or worse, I assume it was because my manager was there, which was unusual. I'm just grateful for whatever it was. This was early 2003 or so, and I'm in a small southern city, so it's doubtful it'll still be online, but I will check. Story 4. The year is 2002. It's late at night and I'm driving to my parents' house that's some way outside the city, basically in the middle of nowhere. A truck cuts me off at an intersection on my way to the highway. I had right of way and would have plowed straight into the truck if I hadn't slammed on the brakes. I honk the horn at him and give him the middle finger, which I doubt he sees, and pass him as we get on the highway. A little while later I turn off the highway and notice that the same truck turns the same way. The roads are smaller and it's dark, so I'm driving at the speed limit and the truck catches up to me. He's getting uncomfortably close, and even though I start speeding up, he just gets closer and closer. When the truck is like 3 feet from my rear bumper, I accelerate as fast as I can and get a couple of 100 yards between us so I can quickly turn at the next intersection. He follows. I hit the accelerator and turn again when the next intersection comes along. So I'm racing down these country roads that are barely wide enough for the truck, and this asshole is keeping up. My heart is beating like crazy. But I also know the area and the roads, and as we get into roads that run through the woods, I turn off my headlights, drive like a maniac, and manage to turn to an even smaller road without him possibly seeing me take the turn. I can't keep driving because I know the road just goes to a cabin and ends there, so I come to a stop a bit down the road and to the side, so the trees will cover me, and turn off my engine. Then I wait. After a while I can see his headlights on the road I turned off from. He's driving slower now. He stops at the intersection and shines a flashlight down the road to where I am. He's looking at my direction for what feels like minutes, and I hope the flashlight can't reach all the way to where my car is. Finally he drives away. I wait for 5 more minutes and then head back to the main road and continue to my parents' house. TLDR, honked at truck driver. He insisted on trying to follow me home. Story 5. Creepiest true story that I remember from when I was very young. We had a nice old neighbor, male, probably in his 70s or early 80s, that lived across the street from us and had a big beautiful black lab. His name was Lee, fake name, and her name was Booger, and she was the nicest dog ever. Well, we used to see Lee out on his porch all the time or in his yard, and we would always say hi, and sometimes my dad would go and have some beers with him later in the evening. Really nice guy. Anyway, came this hot summer, I mean hot. 110 degrees for at least a month, in Michigan. That's ridiculous. We didn't see Lee out on his porch or the yard for a couple of days, but we figured he was probably staying inside with the AC, being as he was an older fella. We went to visit my aunt for 3 days after that because she was awesome and had a pool, lol. When we came back, my dad went to visit Lee, and I just remember everyone being really upset. Not just an old man died, upset. My dad was puking in the grass when he came back. Even an hour later. He wouldn't talk about it, even to my mom. I know he gave a statement to the police, and I remember seeing them taking Lee's dog away. I was crying because Booger was a nice dog and I wanted to keep her if Lee had died. I didn't understand what had happened at the time. It wasn't until I was older that my dad finally opened up to me about it. He was drunk when he did, he needed to get it off of his chest. He had never even told my mother, they were divorced by the time he told me. He said that he went in the house and the smell was horrible. Thick, almost oily, like you could feel it coating your mouth. He said that the first thing he noticed was the lights all being off and the flies. There were flies all over. Lee wasn't anywhere to be seen right off, so my dad looked around the house. He said that he got halfway into the hall and he heard a weird noise in the back bedroom. A repetitive noise. He said that he first thought that it was a clicking noise, but as he got closer it started to sound more wet. It didn't even occur to him that the dog would still be in the house. The hungry dog. He opened the door to the back bedroom and he said the stink hit him in the face like a ton of bricks. He almost passed out from the strength of the stench. He threw up right there in the doorway, before he even looked. Lee was in his bed, or what was left of him. His head and shoulders were intact, but he was decaying rapidly in the heat. From the chest down, Dad said he was missing most of his flesh. His gut was entirely gone. The dog still had a muzzle in him and was working on a hole in his legs. He said that the dog didn't even stop or notice him. He slammed the door and booked it home.